KPBS On Demand is supported by Marrokal Design and Remodeling, helping homeowners with their home remodeling needs. From ADUs to kitchen remodels, room additions, and custom homes, Marrokal Design and Remodeling can help homeowners design and build their dream homes. More at trustyourhometous.com.
This week on KPBS Roundtable, the direction of transit could be changing in San Diego County. The CEO of SANDAG has been pushing for more mass transit options, but now he's leaving at the end of the year.
I think it kind of became clear to Ikhrata that he didn't have the support from the board that he needed to do the kind of work that he wanted to do in San Diego County, and it was just time to give somebody else a chance.
What does Hasan Ikhrata's departure mean for our region?
He speaks his mind, and he doesn't care if he angers or infuriates board members because he has these singular goals he wants to achieve.
Our panel of journalists are diving into what he was able to accomplish and how priorities might change with a new leader. Don't go anywhere. Roundtable is coming up next.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Marrokal Design and Remodeling, helping homeowners with their home remodeling needs. From ADUs to kitchen remodels, room additions, and custom homes, Marrokal Design and Remodeling can help homeowners design and build their dream homes. More at trustyourhometous.com.
You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. A recent announcement could change the direction of transit in San Diego County. The San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG's Chief Executive Officer Hasan Ikhrata says he's leaving the agency at the end of this year. Ikhrata has been pushing for more mass transit options as leaders have set ambitious goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But those pushes made some enemies who wanted projects like widening freeways to continue. Joining us to discuss this shakeup in San Diego's transportation leadership and what could be changing are KPBS's Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. The San Diego Union Tribune's Lori Weisberg is here with us. She covers tourism and hospitality. And Voice of San Diego CEO and Editor-in-Chief Scott Lewis is also with us. I want to welcome you all back here to Roundtable. Let's just dive into it. Andrew, we'll start with you. Ikhrata's been with SANDAG since 2018, and you actually recently spoke with him. Why does he say he's leaving?
Well, Matt, it really came down to the acrimonious relationship that had developed between Ikhrata and a handful of SANDAG board members and some other elected officials around the county as well. His most vocal critics were Republicans, just to name a few: San Marcos Mayor Rebecca Jones, County Supervisor Jim Desmond, who's actually not on the SANDAG board but is still very vocally opposed to Ikhrata and his ideas. And these elected officials used Ikhrata and his policies to sort of whip up anger and resentment among their constituents about the direction that the agency was going in. You mentioned it already: more money spent on public transit, less money spent on freeways, and also the taxes and fees that would be necessary to actually pay for a transportation system that reflects and meets our climate goals. So the public pressure, the most vocal opposition was from Republicans, but the public pressure that they were able to drum up actually made the Democrats on SANDAG's board nervous as well. And their defense of him and his ideas ultimately had its limits. So I think it kind of became clear to Ikhrata that he didn't have the support from the board that he needed to do the kind of work that he wanted to do in San Diego County. And it was just time to give somebody else a chance.
And briefly, Andrew, to be clear, this is a resignation, not a firing, right?
Yeah, that's what he says. There was an effort earlier this year to use his performance evaluation at the board of directors to maybe try and get him removed, but he got through that, and it seemed like maybe he just wanted to leave on his own terms.
And we're going to dive into all those things you talked about in a moment of maybe what led up to this, what's been done, what's yet to be finished. But Scott, if we can, let's take a little step back here. Some people, they might be unfamiliar with SANDAG or what their CEO does. Can you sort of lay that out for us? I mean, is it fair to say that they have a hand in almost all the projects that happen transportation-wise in San Diego?
Yeah, most of them. So the San Diego Association of Governments is, there's a lot of these across the state and in other parts of the country that they're supposed to do regional planning for transportation in particular, but they also have roles in data collection and in housing sort of targets. It was created by state legislation, and it is kind of the UN of local cities, right? So the cities all send representatives to it. The county has representatives there, and there's other representatives from the region that don't have voting power. Like even, I think Mexico has a seat there to watch. And so their job was to plan for decades out in the future. What highways do we need? What transportation lines and trains and other things do we need? How are we going to pay for them? And now the state has, of course, given them the task of meeting climate goals. And they're supposed to do this planning in coordination with those goals and make sure that they hit them. In the past, they could come up with the numbers to make it possible to hit them, but it was pretty clear that they weren't following the spirit of the commitments, and the state slapped them back a few times. I think it's, Andrew pointed out the conservatives that rallied against him, but it's worth noting that the executive director for a long time was a guy named Gary Gallegos, who was really consensus builder. SANDAG had this way of always being unanimous on all votes and such. But there was a problem. They, in 2016, we revealed that they had vastly overstated how much money they were going to collect from a sales tax, a half-cent sales tax known as Transnet, and that they were making promises about a new sales tax that they couldn't back up, and that they would have trouble even paying for all the things that they'd already said that they would do with that tax. And the scandal that created ended up led to a law that changed the makeup of the governance of SANDAG. It essentially said that instead of each city having a more or less equal say in what the board got to do, that the weighted presence of the city of San Diego in particular would carry more power at the board because of how many people live there. And with just a couple other cities joining the city of San Diego, they could make policy and projections themselves. And Hasan Ikhrata was hired after that. In fact, the irony is he pointed out the conservatives that were against it. It was actually Mayor Kevin Faulconer who largely engineered Hasan Ikhrata's appointment to that seat as the CEO, as it became known. And he very much looked at the job the way that the governance had been set up, that his job was to serve both the climate goals and the big ideas that they had said he needed to implement, and to serve these larger cities because that's the power. And he really made no bones about that. He knew how the power worked, and that was the group that he served. And so this agency that was so built around consensus and not making news became just an incredibly volatile place, and news flowed very easily from it since then.
And we know that SANDAG board, it's made up of mayors and city council members from across the county who, I guess, basically ultimately decide what projects will get done. Lori, we know that you recently wrote that Ikhrata's relationship with board members at times has been rocky. And we just heard from Scott about, the previous leader there, maybe more of a consensus builder. But what do you mean by rocky? We've sort of alluded to it a little bit, but what can you tell us there?
Well, I mean, if for listeners who don't know Hasan Ikhrata's personality, he's very plain-spoken. He can be bombastic. He speaks his mind. He doesn't care if he angers or infuriates board members because he has these singular goals he wants to achieve, which involved, more mass transit, more transit to the airport. He had these very goals, and no one was going to get in his way of doing that. Yes, he realizes that there had to be some consensus building. But the irony is that in the last year, it was almost, you were waiting for him to resign because he didn't, it was even more than hinting at it. He would talk about, well, if the board members don't like what I'm saying, if they don't want to go along with what I'm saying, I'm going to leave. He's told us that, he's told The Voice that, he's not been shy about saying that, and he's got enough confidence in himself to follow through on those threats. They weren't, I guess, obviously it turned out they weren't idle threats, but ultimately that rocky relationship did stem from the lack of consensus on the board about all in for transit versus, widening of roads, more lanes on highways and freeways. And so he was very adamant about that position he was taking. And so that in part led to that rocky relationship, because not everybody was on board with him, and I think probably not everybody liked his plain spokenness.
Scott, go ahead, jump in.
Well, it's really interesting that his vision at first was everybody should be able to get around San Diego as easily without a car as they can with a car. Now, obviously, for those of us who function here, that's a huge promise. And it evolved to the last one. When the last time I talked to him, as he was after his resignation announcement, it had evolved to, well, everybody should have the option to do something else to get where they need to go. So the big ideas had whittled down quite a bit as he faced reality. But I think that's an important part, is he was trying to say you can't just make up numbers anymore to say you're going to deal with climate change. You have to really change how people live if you really think you're going to hit these goals that you say you want to hit. And this is the big things you'd have to change to do it. And they didn't particularly like that on either side.
Andrew, do you have any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, I would just add, that SANDAG is a very staff-driven agency. The work that the staff do there is extraordinarily complex. They're dealing with very complicated modeling that predicts what type of transit project or piece of infrastructure, what kind of impact it will have on the number of miles that we drive, and the greenhouse gas emissions that we put into the atmosphere. And the board members of SANDAG all have at least one other job, which is the mayor or city council or member or county supervisor. Sometimes they have two other jobs, because those, elected positions are not always full time. And on top of that, the board only meets maybe 2 to 3 times per month for a couple of hours. So it's very easy for the CEO or whoever's at the top to really just run the show. And when board members don't like the options that staff present to them, it can be really hard for them to push back and steer things in a different direction, because they may not have the time or the know-how to really, drill down on or challenge the types of complex modeling that SANDAG staff understand and nobody else does. And this was true before Hasan Ikhrata also. I mean, Scott mentioned his predecessor Gary Gallegos. I think he used this power of SANDAG being such a staff-driven agency very skillfully, because he would often present things, he and his staff would present things to the board that maybe had the illusion of giving the board an option, but ultimately it was kind of just like the decision had already been made for them. So I think what led to Ikhrata's downfall was that the vision that he presented just didn't jive with the folks on the board, and they often felt very frustrated with the types of options and ideas that were being presented to them, and they couldn't very easily push back or steer it in a different direction.
Well, let's hear from Ikhrata himself. Here's what he recently told KPBS in response to the idea of his tenure being marked by controversy.
I'm going to repeat something the CEO of Apple, former CEO of Apple, said, Steve Jobs. He said, if you want to make people happy, go sell ice cream. Don't lead. Leading is a messy business. I think part of it is they hear the idea that they never heard of before. Let us provide a multimodal transportation system where people have choices.
He went on later to say that some SANDAG board members essentially said, expand my highways or don't talk to me. And Andrew, we'll start with you here, and anybody else feel free to jump in after. Is it fair to say that that's the major rub here, that Ikhrata wanted more mass transit as opposed to more freeways?
Yes and no. I mean, Ikhrata tried really, really hard to reframe this debate. He didn't want to talk about freeways versus public transit. He wanted to talk about, are we going to meet our climate goals, or are we going to ignore them? Are we going to pursue projects and policies that correct some of the inequities and injustices of the past, building freeways through low-income communities of color and leaving them with horrible, public health impacts and quality of life impacts? Or are we going to pursue policies that exacerbate those problems? And, certain board members just didn't buy it. They saw this debate in San Diego ultimately as a freeway versus a freeway widening versus a public transit project. And they wanted their freeway widenings. They wanted to go back to their constituents and say, I got this done for you. This plan was, this freeway project was in the plan 5 years ago. It got removed for political reasons. And, a lot of times I don't think they were very honest about the reality that, Scott alluded to earlier, that we didn't have the money to build the project anymore. And because the cost had gone up and because we weren't bringing in the revenues that we had originally been told that we were going to bring in. And so, not to mention the fact that freeway widenings don't actually fix congestion. This is, something that we've known for many decades. They ultimately entice more drivers onto the road, and congestion returns to the way that it was, within a couple of years.
Scott, you want to jump in here?
Well, I think this, I would point out too, this community has this really strange relationship with the climate change goals. So I think there's a consensus majority that would say, boy, we're worried about this situation and we want to do something big. And it's very easy for this community, the state, cities to pass these extremely ambitious goals about how much greenhouse gas emissions they're going to sequester or reduce. And I think they're really good at doing that. It's like saying, they're going to run a marathon, but when it comes to actually running and training for the marathon, they get a little worried about it and back off pretty easily. So I think Hasan came in and said, well, if you really want to hit these goals, not only are you going to have to do more transit, more options for people, and people are going to have to get out of their cars. He came in and also his staff introduced the concept that you're going to have to pay to drive a little bit more. Now, electric vehicles are going to not use gas, and they're not going to pay the gas tax. So that means that just paying for making up that difference is a challenge, and we're going to have to fund roads and transit in different ways than we have with those things. But also, we need to discourage driving. There's in lots of cities across the world, people are experimenting with congestion pricing or other things that would discourage driving. And so he said, look, we're going to have to do a fee on people driving in order to make up for the lost gas tax from the electric cars, but also to discourage people from driving. That's a core part of this plan, and to help us fund for some of these things to build in the future. And you have to do. You don't want to do that. You have to do a toll, or you have to do a congestion system. You have to do something like that. And they were like, okay, it makes sense. But when it finally became clear that that's something that they might do into the future, no matter how illegal and unrealistic it was right now, it was something that opponents were able to seize on really easily. And you see this all the time about gas stoves, or about zoning and allowing more units to be built around transit. Every time it gets hard to do something to meet one of these goals, everybody backs off, not just the conservatives, everybody, even the most ardent political leaders like Todd Gloria, who will say that climate change is something that they very much hold up as a priority to deal with. They all back off. And he wasn't willing to let them back off easily. And that's a big part of why he's not going to be there anymore.
Yeah, right. And yeah, to that point, I mean, in the past, it seemed like this debate of transit versus road expansion seemed to be Republican versus Democrat. But when push came to shove on this driver fee, it was Todd Gloria, a Democrat, who pushed to get it removed. So it was, as you said, Scott, when it became like close to being a reality, and we're really going to have to answer to the public on imposing this kind of fee, they suddenly were not so passionate about climate change and reducing gas house emissions, and Gloria took the lead on getting that removed.
I think everybody's familiar with like traffic on the freeways, right? Like whatever freeway you're taking, at some point you're going to run into that. And it, like as somebody pointed out, it might be easy to say, well, widen freeways because that's what people are doing right now. They're maybe not using transit to the extent that what we want them to. But is it about changing behaviors then, Andrew? Is that what they were talking about? Even when we talk about this per mile fee that they were talking about, which I'm confused on that even because it was in the plan, it was out of the plan. Some people say it's still in the plan. I mean, what exactly are we talking about here?
Yeah, well, it does come down to changing behaviors. There, like when we were, what I was going to say, I think it's worth kind of drilling down on exactly what our climate goals are. So California has adopted a goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. It can reasonably accomplish that goal in the electricity sector. All that involves is just building a lot of renewable energy projects and changing the type of electricity that we feed into the grid. It's not by no means a done deal, or it's by no means going to be easy, but we can see a pathway towards there. With transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in California, and you cannot necessarily force people not to drive. Our economy depends on fossil fuels and on people getting in their cars and getting to work, moving goods around the state. And so, I think anyone who's really paying close attention to these climate goals and is really being honest with themselves can see a pretty wide gap between what we say we're going to do and what we actually see happening on the ground. The net zero goal, yes, Scott said we do generally in San Diego, there is some degree of consensus that climate change is real and that we need to listen to the scientists and do, take the steps they say are necessary to make climate change a more manageable disaster than an unmanageable disaster. And so the Paris Climate Accords are where this goal of net zero emissions came from, and the state has done some very, very complicated math around how much emissions reductions we can expect from electricity, from electric vehicles, our transition to an electric fleet, and they've come to the conclusion, and we have no reason to doubt them, that we have to very dramatically and very quickly reduce the amount of miles that we drive each year. They actually put a number on it. They say a 25% reduction in the average amount of miles that we drive in the next 7 years by 2030. So, 7 years from now, 1 out of every 4 trips you take by car just wouldn't happen, or it would happen via another mode of transportation. And I think that's, something that Hasan Ikhrata really tried to confront people with. He wanted us to have a real honest conversation about what it's really going to take for us to achieve those goals that we've set and that we say are so important to us. And, for the elected officials, and I think ultimately for a lot of voters and average San Diegans, we're just not ready to hear that.
Coming up, with SANDAG CEO leaving at the end of this year, how might transportation planning change in our region? That's coming up just ahead. You're listening to KPBS Roundtable.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Markel Design and Remodeling, helping homeowners with their home remodeling needs. From ADUs to kitchen remodels, room additions, and custom homes, Markel Design and Remodeling can help homeowners design and build their dream homes. More at trustyourhometous.com.
You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. We're talking about SANDAG CEO announcing that he's leaving the Transportation Planning Agency. But what impact could that have on our region? I'm joined by KPBS's Andrew Bowen, the San Diego Union Tribune's Lori Weisberg, and Voice of San Diego's Scott Lewis. Andrew, when you spoke with SANDAG CEO Hasan Ikhrata earlier, there was a quote that stood out to me. He said that we did amazing things despite a dysfunctional board. I guess, what was he able to accomplish during his nearly 5 years?
Well, it was a big accomplishment to complete the Blue Line trolley extension that now goes from Old Town up to UCSD and University City. He was never a big fan of the design and the decisions around where to put that trolley, but, at least he got it done. He got the funding that SANDAG needed to complete Otay Mesa 2, which is a new border crossing that will open with Mexico. he got the funding to start work on moving the train tracks off of the Del Mar Bluffs, which are slowly collapsing. And, that's a project that we've kind of been putting off for a really long time. And they're trying to get it shovel ready in time for, it to attract funds from the infusion of federal dollars from the federal infrastructure law. He also funded the Youth Opportunity Pass, which offers free public transit to riders 18 and under. But, thinking big picture in these, those are kind of the more concrete accomplishments that he can point to. But, he really did change the debate around transportation and climate change. There's been, of course, a lot of backlash to his ideas, but I think sometimes these things have a way of getting normalized over time. So Scott mentioned, our transition to electric vehicles is just going to mean we have less and less gas tax revenues coming in, and we're still going to have, to spend money on fixing the roads and filling potholes and things like that. So this idea of charging drivers by the mile, I think, is something that we're going to have to face eventually. And, I'll just give a plug for my podcast, Freeway Exit. We talk a lot about the history of freeways and how, we built the system that we have today. And you can look back a couple decades to fights over HOV lanes. Carpool lanes back in the 70s were an extraordinarily controversial idea. And there was one project in particular in Los Angeles that ultimately failed. They opened up carpool lanes on the 10 for a couple of months and then had to back down after people just had an absolute fit. And now carpool lanes are something that we all pretty much acknowledge are an effective way of managing our transportation system. So I think we don't know the true impact of Hasan's leadership at SANDAG for a while in terms of that debate and the what we consider acceptable ideas and what we're just not willing to consider. But there are definitely a number of concrete accomplishments that he can point to that we can see today on the ground with regards to the trolley and things that'll be coming in the next couple of years.
And Lori, we know that one of those big projects too, hasn't happened yet, but that's connecting transit to the airport. I mean, that's something that we've been talking about for years here, but is that becoming closer to reality? And I imagine that would be just an absolutely massive project.
Yes, it is. And if you had asked me this, several months ago, I would say it's just a pipe dream because it was, in the past discussions, it was as much as $4 billion or even more. It's talking about tunneling under roads, part of it aerial. But this most recent meeting where SANDAG planning staff, as Andrew pointed out, they did the deep dive into the modeling, and they're kind of directing and pushing the board toward what I think is their favored recommendation. But they have gotten the price down to about 1.5 to 2 billion, but that's only because it's a less ambitious proposal. But it would go from the Santa Fe depot to the north to the airport, and there'd be a stop in potentially the convention center or the civic center area, and it would be all aerial. There'd be no tunneling. And like I said, the price has come down considerably because before it was also going to go north of the airport as well, to Old Town. They also looked at the trolley, but they're saying that the biggest bang for the buck you get from an automated people mover, a driverless vehicle that would take you, stop every 2 to 4 minutes and take you right to a terminal, right to a station at the airport. So it's getting closer, but it's still going to require a local match of money. They believe that they could get the federal money and some state money, but they will need a local match. Some of that will come from the airport, but there's still going to have to be some money from Transnet or potentially a new sales tax measure. But before, the more ambitious proposal was entirely reliant on a new sales tax measure, which we don't have yet for a future ballot. So it's getting closer, but I think you're still going to have to convince people, is it still worth the investment to save some time on the current transit option? It does save some time, but people still may just want to drive their car or take Uber to the airport, to and from the airport. So that's part of the problem, is getting people to change their behavior, as we've been talking about.
And I know you said that was a project that was near and dear to his heart. But Scott, we know that Ikhrata, he told Andrew earlier that maybe the next SANDAG CEO can achieve more without some of these political fights or political bickering. But what's at stake here in terms of the next regional transportation leader? Could some projects be shelved, or the directions of investments in things like mass transit maybe going away?
Well, the biggest thing right now is they have submitted a new plan without that fee that we talked about to this, or they will submit to the state a new plan for the 40-year transportation system that doesn't include that fee. And the state will have to decide immediately whether that does conform to the climate change goals the state set. And he says, yeah, I hope they do, but he's not entirely 100% certain they will, and I don't think anybody is. So that'll be a big challenge if the state rejects that somehow. I think that there is a lot of accomplishments, and I'm certainly one whose ideas haven't worked out before, so I can't really hit somebody too hard for that. But a lot of Hasan's ideas really burned down and went poorly. Like he had an idea of a major downtown mobility hub, some kind of Grand Central San Diego station, worked really hard to push that vision. And it was really indicative of how little juice he had at the end, that the city of San Diego basically ignored it completely as it planned its redevelopment of the downtown civic center area. And I don't think has any plans to incorporate that, which is a pretty big swing and a miss. The $2 billion to go to the airport, and that would probably grow, is, I think, a real tough thing for even transit activists, I think, to swallow, to be excited about. Yes, connecting the airport matters, but it's a certain population of people that benefit from that there's already a bus that is pretty convenient to get to the airport. To spend $2 billion on something like that, when there's so many other needs for options for working people around the community, even just more frequent busing would have a tremendous impact on our transportation system, and $2 billion would go a long way to making that a reality. So I think there's a lot of, he was very attracted to these very big ideas and frankly, just big construction projects in the central city area. And I think largely the city has said that they're not interested in that. And the new CEO will have to meld some of these old ideas. We'll have to deal with that long-term plan. But the other big thing that's on the horizon is that there are people, unions and other activists, supporting a sales tax measure that they want to put on the ballot that would be a citizens initiative that would raise the sales tax, that would compete potentially with other taxes on the ballot. They're gathering signatures now. They're going to turn those in to see if they have enough. And they are promising a new airport connection and potholes. They want to fix potholes. Everybody, they know that moves the needle on a lot of things.
And as we wrap up here, we want to hear from everyone. It sounds like Ikhrata is going to have some type of lasting legacy. He'll be here through the end of the year. But what's left unanswered, or what are you going to be watching for in the months ahead? And Andrew, if you want, you can also fold that into what's at stake in terms of the next CEO. But we'll start with you here, Andrew.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be watching the selection process for the new CEO. Will it be an internal candidate who came up under Hasan Ikhrata's leadership and might be sympathetic to his views, but is perhaps less abrasive or polarizing? Will it be somebody from outside, San Diego County? Who is it? Somebody who is willing to state at the very outset what their vision is, or are they going to kind of wait and take their cues from the board of directors? And then, to reiterate what Scott said, I think we have to pay really close attention to whether or not the state gives approval for SANDAG to remove this mileage tax or mileage fee from their regional transportation plan. I think that if ultimately the state rejects that change and says, no, this is the plan that you gave us and you have to stick with it, despite Hasan Ikhrata saying he wants the state to approve this new plan, I think a rejection of it would be something of a vindication for him, because he's been saying all along that, you can have the best plan, the best type of infrastructure in the world, but if you don't price the system correctly, if there's not a financial incentive for people to leave their cars in the garage and take public transit instead, then it's not going to work. So that's what I'll be watching.
And Lori, what about you? What are some of your final thoughts here? Like with the new CEO coming in, could that put this whole transit to the airport project at risk, or what are some of the things you're thinking about?
I'm probably not quite as pessimistic as Scott is about it because it is a much smaller budget. And I should note that San Diego and only one other city, San Antonio, are the only ones of the major cities that does not have some kind of people mover system. So the bus system, I've been in lots of airports, and I'm not gonna take a bus like the way we have it now. It's not people are not going to get on that system. But anyway, I think that there's still going to be a push even without Hasan here because of the huge airport expansion going on. I mean, it's a $3.4 billion project. Many more millions of passengers. I think pressure will continue to build for some kind of system. So I remain kind of hopeful that will go forward, but I realize it's a very tough sell when there's so many other competing projects. Looking ahead, and obviously we don't know if that sales tax measure will get onto the ballot, and if it does get on the ballot, will it be approved? So that's my thought on the airport project going forward.
And Scott, you have the final word.
I think that's the big thing, right? Like if the state does reject the thing, that would be a big endorsement of much more dramatic action needed. If they accept it, it's just part of the same thing that the city and SANDAG's been doing, is just like kicking it down, saying, well, we'll make sure somebody else has to make those hard choices to meet the goals that we have set. It's always easy to say you're going to lose weight until you get hungry. It's easy to run a marathon until you actually have to run it. And that's what this community is all dealing with. And the new CEO, I bet, is a much quieter consensus builder who focuses on getting money into the region and making people happy that he or she answers to. And I think it's going to be maybe a little bit less news coming from SANDAG after this.
We'll have to stay tuned and see how that's going to change, the future of transportation in San Diego. I've been speaking with KPBS's Andrew Bowen, the San Diego Union Tribune's Lori Weisberg, and Voice of San Diego's Scott Lewis. And everyone, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Coming up on Roundtable, some other top stories we're following in the Roundup. You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. You're listening to KPBS Roundtable. I'm Matt Hoffman. It's now time for the Roundtable Roundup, where we take a look at some other stories happening in and around San Diego. KPBS's border reporter Gustavo Solis is here with us this week. Gustavo, how's it going?
Oh, good. How are you doing, Matt?
Doing well. Good to have you here. So what's on your list this week? What's been catching your eye?
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a little selfish and just talk about some of the stories I've been working on first and then move on to the other ones, if that's okay.
All good.
Perfect. Well, the first one, it's a fun story. It's a fun border story that doesn't really have anything to do with migration or death and chaos. It's a positive one about Tijuana's Little League team and how they're going to represent Mexico in the Little League World Series.
I saw that story and it looked pretty cool because like you were saying, because not only because they won like the national championship, but then now they're going to go like on the world stage. And then you said it was kind of cool, like they're almost like celebrities right now.
Yeah. So we've been following the team for a bit now. We followed them before they went to the national tournament where they were competing against all the best Little League teams in Mexico, and then they won. And we've been following them. And ever since they won, when they came back from that national tournament, they've been mini celebrities. I mean, while Matt Bowler and I were out there filming and reporting, there were a bunch of little kids just watching them practice. One of the parents had a baseball that he was passing around to all the other players, and they were all signing it for him. So it's been pretty wild to see. I mean, they got invited to the Tijuana Toros, which is a professional baseball team over there, where they all threw out the first pitch. They've been in a bunch of local TV and radio shows as well, so they've been getting a pretty good celebrity treatment.
And then it sounds like now they'll be heading to Pennsylvania to play in the Little League World Series. One other interesting thing in that story was one 12-year-old pitcher you talked to, 73-mile-an-hour fastball. That is fast. Okay, let's move on to what's next. It sounds like this is also south of the border.
Yeah. It's a two-part series that we published on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, looking at Tijuana infrastructure and how I think a lot of people don't realize how big Tijuana is, and that whole city, that whole region, if it expands to Rosarito a little bit and out east to Tecate. But government figures in Mexico say 2.2 million people live in Tijuana, which would put it right behind Houston in terms of most populous cities in the U.S. It would rank 6. So it's a massive metro area. And the infrastructure is crumbling. I mean, one of the stories was about landslides and crumbling buildings, and the second one was about the city's storm drain and sewer system and how that's all a big mess. So it's been interesting to explore the city from that angle.
And is that are people pointing to that infrastructure as why, people that live at areas like Imperial Beach or Coronado see those beach closures or?
Yes and no. It's obviously a contributing factor. I mean, we went to Playas de Tijuana, it's a neighborhood that's right by the beach there. And you can just see a dozen pipes, storm drain pipes, emptying out into the ocean. And normally when the system is functioning, you only see water flowing through those pipes after it rains. But we went there a month after it had rained, and there was water coming out, and the water was kind of brown and it smelled like poop. And that's just directly going into the ocean. Now, that's not the main contributor. I think the main contributor are another type of infrastructure problems with overburdened waste management plants, water treatment plants that just haven't been maintained properly and break down all the time, some leaks along the whole system. But this little part of the contamination that we covered is definitely contributing and really hasn't gotten as much attention. And it's a lot difficult to fix, right? It's easy to fix one water treatment plant that, needs very basic repairs. It's a whole other thing to fix an entire city's storm drain and sewer systems.
Yeah, sort of along those lines, too. I think in your reporting, you said that, some people might be thinking, oh, this is old infrastructure. But even some of the new homes, I think you said an estimated 40%, they don't have permits. So they also might be kind of in this, lack of infrastructure area.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big problem for both of the types of problems we talked about, right? With the landslides, Tijuana is a city built on hills. Think of San Diego. Think of Mission Valley in San Diego. Imagine if all of Mission Valley was just no vegetation on those hills and illegal construction all over the place, right? Some of these houses don't have foundation. They don't have retaining walls. When it rains, it rains a lot. The soil underneath moves around, and it's prone to cause landslides, and people lose their homes and their properties and sometimes their life. When it comes to the sewage issue, similar thing, a lot of construction is illegal, so there's no ownership papers, there's no deeds. And when people get to the point in the construction where they have to connect their sewer line to the state sewer line, they just connect to whichever one is closest. And a lot of times that's just the storm drain. So you have a lot of people just funneling their wastewater into the storm drain system to the point in Tijuana where it's all kind of one big mess.
Well, I know it's a story that you're going to continue to follow. All right, what else is on your list? What else are you seeing this week?
Well, I'll give a shout out to Union Tribune. They need it after the buyout that they got last month. But I thought Lori Weisberg had a great story about what's going on with SeaWorld and just the city's efforts to try to collect, what was it, $12.2 million in back rent?
Yeah, I think, and that was from pandemic times, right? When they weren't necessarily operating?
Yeah, they've been trying to collect this for years, which is the part I thought was interesting, how the city has given SeaWorld multiple warnings. I think they're up to 3 warnings. Last time this was in the news, the city council had authorized the city attorney's office to file legal action to collect that money, and the attorney's office still hasn't done it. So just personally, what jumped out about that story to me was how much leeway the city is giving to SeaWorld after 3 years of not paying rent and owing millions of dollars.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that collection process works, but we should also point out that story was done by Lori Weisberg, who you all just heard on Roundtable talking about SANDAG and the future of transit in our region here. And as we wrap up here, Gustavo, I know it's August, but we have an election right now.
Yeah, we do. I've been getting a lot of mailers for that one, actually, because I live in County Supervisor District 4.
And that's Monica Montgomery Stepp, Janessa Goldbeck, Amy Reichart, and Paul McQuigg, who are vying for Nathan Fletcher's old seat after he resigned. But it sounds like there's been a lot of kind of, I know you mentioned some of those mailers, but a lot of back and forth on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, I knew sources. Jill Castellano was on here last week talking about the report she did on some of the mailers, specifically how much money the police and deputy district attorneys unions have put into criticizing Montgomery Stepp. I will say, I don't cover this race. I don't cover San Diego County politics too much. But just as a resident who gets the mailers, most of them are in favor of Monica. And the only other candidate I've received mailers from is Janessa. So those two, just from an outsider, seem to be like the front runners in the election. And I thought Jill Castellano's story was really, really interesting because it tells you a little bit of what the police union and the deputy district attorneys union think of criminal justice reformers, right? Some of the reforms that Montgomery Stepp was proposing were an independent oversight committee and addressing some of the racial disparities that I think the one that sticks out to me was the fact that Black and brown San Diegans are stopped by police at a rate that's 4 times higher than white San Diegans. Someone's trying to stop those things and provide a little bit more accountability for the police, and the response you get from the union is to attack her. I think that kind of tells you a little bit about the culture of law enforcement and prosecutors.
And as a reminder for our listeners, this race is to replace former County Supervisor, Nathan Fletcher. He resigned from the board after being accused of sexual assault, something he denies. But voting ends on August 15th. So that's get your ballot in the mail by then or vote in person. There's 29 different ballot drop boxes in the area. Gustavo, thanks so much for joining us here on The Roundup. Great to have you.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Really appreciate you having me on.
That's it for Roundtable this week. We'd like to hear your thoughts on our show. Leave us a voicemail, 619-452-0228. You can also email us, roundtable@kpbs.org. If you missed any part of our show, go ahead and check out the KPBS Roundtable podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Our show airs on KPBS at noon on Fridays and again on Sunday at 6 a.m. Roundtable was produced by Brooke Ruth, and our technical producer is Rebecca Chacon. I'm your host, Matt Hoffman. Thanks so much for being here with us. Have a great weekend.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Markel Design and Remodeling, helping homeowners with their home remodeling needs. From ADUs to kitchen remodels, room additions, and custom homes, Markel Design and Remodeling can help homeowners design and build their dream homes. More at trustyourhometous.com.